Good morning, everyone. For this lesson, I am going to be going over where different elements of the Illustrator interface are located. And so to start, what I'm going to do is just click on File, New, and create a new file that I can use to be able to actually access the menus to show you where things are. You can also do this on your own along with me. When I got into the File New, I went to the print presets here, and I'm just choosing letter. And when I click create, it's going to go ahead and put my canvas up. And right off the bat, if you've worked with other Adobe programs such as Photoshop, it'll look very familiar. You have a lot of the same elements. You have a toolbar on the left that has all of your tools that you can use to do things within the program. And then on the right, you have icons and panels. The panels and panel groups along here have different options for characteristics for the things you're working with. So if you're doing anything with text, character is going to allow you to edit the font and things like that, just like in Photoshop. Also, across the top, we have menus, which I'm going to go over briefly, and you have tool options, which I will also go over a little bit. So if you go to the menus, up at the top, the home just takes you back to that home screen that we were already on. If you I shouldn't have gone in there. If you go back, if you want to get back out of there, you can click that little arrow, but I just wanted to show you that's what that does. But file, of course, that's where you're going to go to create new files, open files, save, export, print, and whatnot. And then edit is going to have things like copying and pasting. And then Illustrator, it's a little different than, say, Photoshop because you're working with shapes and like text objects and things that you might have multiple different things that are overlapping and underlapping in the same way layers do in Photoshop. But in here, like you'll have the option to paste something in front or paste it in back and so on. There are also instead of working with one canvas, you have basically a canvas area that you can have multiple artboards on. So in addition to this white area here, we can have multiple ones. So things like paste on all artboards would allow you to copy and paste something that would then appear on every artboard that you have in a file. And then there's other things like preferences and color settings and things like that. And of course you have submenus with all the different things. So if you're dealing with, like, say, spelling, you can see there's auto spell check and check spelling as options under that. Objects, when you have objects made, you'll eventually have the ability to group objects. I don't have any objects in there right now, so there's nothing to group, but one of the big things you'll be dealing with a lot is when you are working on something and you add an effect to it, you'll have to use this thing that says expand or expand appearance. So you'll be seeing a lot of this. Also, one of the big formats is, or one of the big like characteristics of Illustrator, it's kind of different, is that when you apply something, like you want to create a new pattern or something, you might select an object and then you would go into Object, Pattern, Make. And the reason is they also have the ability to edit a pattern that's already been made, or you can do what's called tiling the edge color. So there are a few different things that we'll be exploring in more depth with this stuff, but you'll see Make is an option on all of these things. Well, most of them, several of them. Type is going to have to do with fonts and font size, glyphs, special characters, things like that. The select menu in Illustrator is similar to the select menu in Photoshop, with the exception that You might be selecting objects based on certain characteristics, or you might be selecting them based on using a object selection tool, which we'll talk more about that later as well. Effect, this is like filters in Photoshop. In Illustrator, one of the big things I got to tell you is Illustrator Effects and Photoshop Effects, they might have similar like submenus in here, but depending on the program, things are located in different spots. So like Stylize under the Photoshop Effects is not going to show you drop shadow, but if you are looking for drop shadow, try looking at the other one, and look, you can add a drop shadow to an object that you have in your image. We'll explore more of this later as well, but just so you know, that's a point that people get a little confused about. There's two separate little areas here. View is going to be where you have things like zoom in and zoom out. You also have access to showing grids and rulers, and there's a thing called the perspective grid that we'll be working with as well. But don't worry about that for now. Just worry about where things are located. And also things like slices, which we'll talk about eventually as well. Just like in Photoshop, window gives you access to all the panels. Those are the things on the right that have those different characteristics of whatever tool you're working with or element of your image and whatnot. But over here you have everything from actions to color to gradient. You have panels for a ton of different things. And you can also access things like workspaces over here, which we'll be working with soon. This is all similar to Photoshop, but just to let you know, that's where that stuff is. As far as the options bar goes, just like in Photoshop, if I click a different tool, depending on what I'm clicking on, it's not, it might change for some things like text, but for the most part, it's going to have to be a very different tool that we're working with in order for it to change. One of the things you'll also notice that's different in Illustrator from Photoshop is that some of these tools you can double click and you can access settings for that specific tool that you normally would access on the control bar. Now the options bar by default doesn't always show up here like this options bar. So to get to it, if you go to Window, Control, it'll come up. And that gives you access to the color picker and the stroke color, which those in Photoshop you normally have a foreground and background color. In Illustrator you have a fill color and stroke color. And we'll talk more about that soon as well. So just a brief introduction. Of course you have your canvas area just like in Photoshop, but that should get you started for today's activity and be able to locate where the different menus, as well as when we start working more with the option bar, understanding how the options bar works. So if you have any questions, please let me know. And otherwise, have an excellent day.